Grandpa, please do not go home tonight. She is hiding something bad in the house. That is what my 7-year-old grandson whispered to me in the parking lot of a church on a Tuesday evening. His small fingers wrapped around my wrist tight enough that I could feel his heartbeat through his palm. His eyes were not the eyes of a child telling stories. They were the eyes of someone who had seen something he should never have seen and carried it alone for far too long. I did not listen that night. I smiled and ruffled his hair and told him everything was fine. That decision almost cost my daughter her life. To understand how a quiet Tuesday outside a church became the night that changed everything, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to a time when I still believed the man sitting across from me at Sunday dinner was the best thing that ever happened to my daughter. Instead of the cage, she was slowly disappearing inside. My name is Thomas Arthur Caldwell. I am 66 years old. I live in a town called Shepherd's Creek in the hill country of Virginia. The kind of place where the post office closes at noon on Wednesdays and everybody knows your dog's name before they learn yours. I drive a 1994 Ford pickup with a dent in the tailgate that I blame on a deer but was actually a mailbox. My dog is a 13-year-old basset hound named Clementine who has not moved faster than a walk since 2019. I eat breakfast every morning at Mabel's. 2 eggs over easy, rye toast, black coffee, same booth by the window where the sun hits the Formica counter and makes the whole place glow amber for about 20 minutes before it climbs past the awning. The coffee there tastes like it was brewed sometime during the previous administration, but I have been drinking it for 11 years and my stomach has made its peace with it. After breakfast, I drive to the VFW hall where I spend 3 hours helping other retired men fix things that do not need fixing, because the fixing is not the point. The company is. The sound of a hand saw in a room full of men who do not need to explain themselves to each other is its own kind of prayer. Before I retired, I worked in risk assessment. That is what I tell people. What I do not tell them is that the risks I assessed were human ones, and that for 23 years, my job was to sit across from people in windowless rooms and determine whether they were telling the truth. I was a military interrogator, intelligence division, 3 tours, 2 commendations I keep in a shoebox under my bed next to a photograph of the woman I still talk to every morning, even though she has been gone 9 years. Her name was Eleanor. Ellie to anyone who loved her, and most people did. Pancreatic cancer took her on a Thursday in October, while the leaves outside her hospice window turned the shade of copper she always loved. She went quietly. That is what people say when they mean the dying was slow and the silence afterward was louder than any sound you have ever heard. Ellie was smarter than me in every way that mattered. She had a saying she repeated so often it became the rhythm of our house. When someone shows you who they are in the small moments, believe them, because the big moments are just the small ones with an audience. I did not understand that phrase fully until a 7-year-old boy whispered it to life in a parking lot. After Ellie died, the house became a museum. Her coffee mug stayed on the second hook. Her reading glasses stayed on the nightstand. I still made the bed on both sides. The silence was not dramatic, it was ordinary. And that is what made it unbearable. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of her specific noise. The humming while she cooked, the shuffle of her slippers at 6:15, the way she cleared her throat before disagreeing with the news, the soft click of her reading lamp at 10:45 every night when she finally put her book down and whispered, "Good night," even though I was already pretending to be asleep. I still hear that click sometimes. I filled the silence with repairs, neighbors' fences, leaking faucets at the church. If I kept my hands busy, I could go most of a day without reaching for a phone that would never ring with her voice again. My daughter Sarah was the only thread still tying me to the man I had been before. The quiet swallowed everything. She was 34, lived 40 minutes away in Millbrook, and worked as an occupational therapist at a children's rehab center. She was kind the way her mother was kind, not loud, constant. The kind that shows up with soup you did not ask for and stays to wash the dishes. She had a son named Oliver, Ollie, 7 years old when this started. Quiet kid, watchful. the kind of child who sits in the corner of a room and notices which adults are pretending to laugh and which ones mean it. He reminded me of myself at that age in ways that made Ellie proud and made me uneasy. Sarah married a man named Victor Ashford when Oliver was 2. Victor was 38, tall, confident, the kind of man who becomes the center of a room without appearing to try. He ran a commercial real estate firm, drove a black sedan worth more than my truck and house combined, and had a handshake that lasted 1 second too long. I tried to like him. When Sarah brought him to Thanksgiving 3 years after Ellie passed, I sat across from him, and I tried. He brought wine expensive enough to feel like a statement rather than a gift. He told a story about a deal that went on longer than it needed to. He called me sir 4 times, which felt right the first time and rehearsed by the 4th. But Sarah was smiling, not the careful smile she had worn through the year after her mother died, but a real one. That smile was worth more to me than any instinct about a handshake, so I kept quiet. Ellie's voice whispered something I was not ready to hear, and I turned the volume down like turning off a radio. I told myself no man would ever be good enough in my eyes. I told myself to let her live. That was my first mistake. I had no idea that what I was choosing to ignore would grow into something that would bring me to my knees in a parking lot, listening to a child try to save his mother with nothing but a whisper, and the hope that his grandfather would believe him. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, if it reminds you of a silence you have heard before or a voice that went too quiet too fast, I hope you will stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this keep reaching the people who need them. The first time I noticed something truly wrong was at Oliver's 5th birthday party. Sarah had organized it in the backyard, streamers in the trees, a homemade dinosaur cake. Victor arrived late, which was not unusual, carrying a gift bag and lifting Oliver high with a grin that made every parent in the yard smile. He spun the boy around until Oliver shrieked with laughter, and then he set him down and knelt to his level and said something I could not hear that made Oliver wrap both arms around his neck. That is the thing about Victor that made everything so much harder. He could be warm when he chose to be. He could light up a child's face with a single look. He could make a room believe he was the best father alive for exactly as long as the room was watching. And in that moment, watching him hold my grandson, I wanted desperately to believe the warmth was real. After the cake, I was carrying plates to the kitchen when I heard his voice through the screen door. The tone had changed, quieter, sharper, like a blade wrapped in cloth. You could not have done this Saturday like I asked. The whole afternoon is gone and I have the Henderson closing Monday. Sarah's voice was barely audible. I thought Sunday worked better for the kids. It does not matter what you thought. It matters what I told you. His voice never rose. That is the detail that stayed with me. A man who yells has lost control. A man who keeps his voice perfectly level while making someone smaller has practiced. I stood on the other side of that door holding paper plates with dinosaurs on them, and something inside me went perfectly still. But I said nothing. I convinced myself I had heard a normal disagreement. I drove home and told Ellie's empty chair I was making something out of nothing. The chair did not argue, but it did not agree either. 6 months later, Christmas dinner. Victor had carved the turkey with the precision of a man performing a task he wanted acknowledged. He was telling a deal story when I mentioned the creek behind my house flooding. He looked at me the way you look at a child interrupting adults. That is charming, Tom. But I am talking about real property, commercial grade. Your little creek is, well, he laughed and looked around to make sure everyone joined. Most did. Sarah did not. She was looking at her plate. He squeezed her shoulder. Right, sweetheart. Tell your dad about our waterfront project. Her response had the texture of a rehearsed line. My jaw tightened, but I smiled and said nothing. In February, I stopped by their house to drop off a box of Ellie's quilts. Victor answered the door. He looked at the box the way someone looks at a stain. He set it on the floor without opening it. I will make sure Sarah sees them. That box sat in the entryway for 2 weeks before Sarah knew it was there. Oliver told me later, in a voice small enough to fit inside a thimble. Grandpa, Dad put Grandma's blankets in the garage. I found them behind the lawnmower. I brought one to my room myself, Something behind my ribs shifted like a foundation before a wall cracks. At a restaurant for Sarah's birthday, Victor chose a place with cloth napkins. When the server, a young woman, barely 20, brought the wrong appetizer, he did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her. "I did not order this. Read it back to me? Go ahead." Her hands shook. He watched the flush climb her neck with an expression that looked like satisfaction. You have to be specific with people. Otherwise, nothing gets done right. Sarah was cutting her food into tiny pieces. Oliver was drawing on a napkin. Nobody spoke. In April, Sarah brought Oliver to my house for a weekend visit. She reached for the sugar on the porch, and her sleeve pulled back. A bruise on her forearm, the size and shape of 4 fingers pressed hard enough to leave the color of a plum. She saw me see it. Her hand moved fast to pull the sleeve down. She knocked the coffee over. "I grabbed the door," she said. "I used to bump into things." I watched my daughter lie to me with the careful voice of someone who has practiced the story until she almost believes it herself. Everything inside me went cold and sharp and still, the way it used to in rooms with concrete walls and one-way glass. But this was my porch, and the person in front of me was my daughter. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. "Is he hurting you?" For half a second, her face crumbled. The mask slipped, and beneath it was something raw and exhausted and terrified. Then she rebuilt it, brick by brick, right in front of me. "Dad, please do not do this. Victor is under pressure with work. He is not like that. He loves us." She picked up the mug. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were not. "Before I go on, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from right now. I read every single one, and knowing you're out there keeps these stories alive, because the next part is where everything changed. It was a Tuesday in June. Sarah asked me to pick Oliver up from after school at the church. I pulled into the lot at 4:30. Oliver was sitting on the bench with his backpack between his knees, and the second he saw my truck, his face collapsed with relief. Not the relief of a child happy to see his grandfather. The relief of someone who has been waiting for rescue. He climbed in, buckled up, and said nothing for 3 minutes. The air in the truck smelled like old leather and the pine tree air freshener Clementine had chewed the corner off months ago. I let the silence sit. I have learned over 66 years that silence is not empty. Silence is where the truth waits until it trusts you enough to come out. At the stoplight on Main Street, he spoke. "Grandpa, can I tell you something?" "You can tell me anything, buddy." "Grandpa, please do not go home tonight. She is hiding something bad in the house." "Mom, but not because she wants to. I think Dad told her to. I think she is really scared and she cannot tell anyone because Dad said if she tells anyone, he will take me away and she will never see me again." I pulled into a parking lot because my hands were no longer steady enough to drive. Oliver was not crying. A 7-year-old telling me his mother was being threatened, and he was not crying because he had moved past crying into something older and harder. He was reporting facts, no emotion, because emotion gets in the way of being believed. "I heard them last night," he said. "Dad was on the phone in the garage. He said he moved the papers to the house and she knows where they are, and if anyone asks, she signed them herself. Then he told Mom if she tries to leave, he will make sure she never gets custody. He said a judge will believe him because he has money and she does not." He paused. He said Mom is not smart enough to understand what she signed, but Mom has been crying every night after he goes to sleep. She thinks I do not hear her, but I hear everything. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder. "I believe you," I said, every word. His chin trembled once. Then he set his jaw the way his grandmother used to and nodded. "What are we going to do, Grandpa?" That night, after I dropped Oliver off and watched through the window as Victor came home and kissed Sarah on the cheek with practiced warmth, I drove home and sat in my kitchen and did not move for a long time. Clementine pressed her head against my knee. The clock above the stove ticked like a heartbeat. I had spent 23 years reading deception for a living, and I had sat at my own daughter's table and missed it. Or worse, I had seen it and chosen not to name it because naming it meant acting, and acting meant risking the only relationship that still made me get out of bed. Ellie's voice found me in the silence. "When someone shows you who they are in the small moments, believe them," I walked to the bedroom closet and pulled down the old green footlocker with my name stenciled on the side in faded white letters. Inside were service records, commendations, a photograph of my unit in a place I cannot name, and a leather notebook with numbers I had not called in 15 years. I found the one I needed, Charles Whitmore. Charlie, retired Army JAG. We had served together in a capacity I still cannot discuss, but Charlie knew more about fraud, coercion, and the ways powerful men weaponize legal systems than anyone alive. He was 71, lived in a cabin outside Lexington, and answered his phone on the second ring at 11:15 at night. "Thomas Caldwell," he said. "I was wondering when you would come out of retirement." I told him everything. Charlie listened without interrupting, which is how you know a man is serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "This is financial coercion layered with emotional abuse," he said. "The papers your grandson described sound like property transfers or post-nuptial amendments signed under duress. If we can prove she signed under threat, they are voidable. But we need more than a child's account. We need Sarah. How do we get there without tipping Victor off?" I asked. "Carefully," Charlie said, "and quickly, because if he discovers anyone is looking, those documents vanish before sunrise." I did not sleep that night. I sat with Ellie's photograph and made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like a duty. I was not going to confront Victor. I was going to do what I was trained to do: watch, wait, gather every piece of truth he thought he had buried, then sit across from him in a room where charm would not save him and let the truth work. Charlie arrived 3 days later, driving a Buick older than most trees on my street. County records revealed that 2 months earlier, a property transfer had moved the title of Sarah's home solely into Victor's name. A separate post-nuptial agreement waived her claim to all assets. Charlie reviewed copies and shook his head. "These terms are unconscionable. If she signed under threat, they are voidable, but we need Sarah herself to confirm." I called Sarah on a Saturday when Victor was at his office. I told her I needed help with Ellie's things in the attic. She came alone. She looked thin in a way that had nothing to do with weight. Thin in the spirit, like someone had been hollowing her out one spoonful at a time while she smiled through it. We looked through boxes. She found Ellie's blue cardigan, and her shoulders shook because it still smelled like lavender and dish soap and a kitchen where nothing bad had ever happened. Then I said it. "Sarah, I know about the papers. I know about the threats. I know what he has been doing. And I need you to know you are not alone. He cannot take Oliver, not with me standing here." She was holding the cardigan against her chest, staring at the wall where Ellie had penciled our heights when Sarah was growing up. "How?" she whispered. "Oliver told me," I said, "because he loves you, and he is scared for you, and he is 7 years old and should not have to carry this." A tear ran down her face onto the collar of her mother's cardigan. "He said he would take Oliver. He said no judge would believe me. He said if I told you it would only make things worse because you are just an old man in a small town and his lawyers eat people like you for breakfast." An old man in a small town. I let the words sit. Then I walked to the footlocker and pulled out a folder I had not opened in 15 years. "Sarah," I said, "there is something about me you do not know." She opened it. Photographs, commendations, a letter from a general whose name she recognized, a service record describing a career she had never been told about. Her father had spent 23 years as one of the top interrogation specialists in military intelligence. I had sat across from arms dealers and men who built empires on lies, and I had dismantled every single one with patience and truth. "Dad," she whispered, "why did you never tell me?" "Because I wanted to be the man who fixed the porch and made pancakes," I said. And I was. But before that, I was this. And right now, this is what you need. Victor is not the most powerful man in any room I have ever sat in. He is not even close. Over the next 2 weeks, Charlie and I worked with Sarah. She described every document, every threat, every method of isolation. Charlie documented it all. We filed motions to void the agreements on grounds of duress. Through a contact at the State Attorney General's office, we flagged the documents because the notary who witnessed them turned out to be Victor's business associate who had notarized similar documents for 3 other women in identical situations. Victor knew nothing. He was still performing, still shaking my hand, still calling me sir. The evening that ended, everything was a Friday in August. Victor organized a dinner to celebrate closing a deal. Business partners, their wives, a councilman, and me. He invited me because he wanted an audience and believed I was part of the scenery. The harmless old father-in-law. Oliver was in a button-down, too stiff for a child. Sarah moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who has learned that perfection is survival. Victor stood and gave a toast. He thanked his partners. He thanked the councilman. He thanked his beautiful wife the way you thank a piece of furniture for being in the right spot. Then he looked at me and Tom, my father-in-law, a simple man from a simple town, the kind of man who reminds you where you came from. Everyone laughed. Victor sipped his wine. I stood up. Victor, I said, there are some people here tonight who need to meet before dessert. The front door opened. Charlie walked in wearing the kind of suit that communicates authority without a word. Behind him was Rachel Torres from the Attorney General's office. Behind her was Detective Margaret Ellis. Victor's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. What is this? He said. His voice was controlled, but his eyes had changed. I had seen that change before, in concrete rooms. The moment a man realizes the door behind him has been locked, and he is the last one to know. This is a conversation, I said, the kind you have been avoiding. Rachel introduced herself and explained the investigation into coerced financial documents connected to Victor's firm. 3 other women had come forward. The notary was already cooperating. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in someone's water glass. Victor's partners looked at him the way people watch a building when they hear the first crack in the foundation. The councilman set down his napkin with the deliberate care of a man calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Victor turned to Sarah. She was standing in the kitchen doorway with Oliver's hand on her hip. She was not shaking. She was not crying. She was looking at the man who had spent 3 years making her feel small, and she was standing at her full height for the first time I could remember. You told them, Victor said. She did not answer. I stepped closer, not threatening. The way you step toward a man when you want him to understand the next words are not a negotiation. You called me a simple man from a simple town. You were right. But simple men notice things. Simple men raise daughters stronger than you ever imagined. And simple men have friends who know the difference between a legal document and a trap. Victor looked around the room. Every face was watching. For the first time since I had known him, he had nothing to say. His shoulders dropped. The performance was over, and behind it was nothing. Not rage, not defiance. Just the hollow surprise of a man who never considered someone might be reading his blueprints. Rachel asked him to step outside with the detective. He went quietly. Not from humility, because every other option had been removed from the room. Oliver tugged my sleeve. Grandpa, is Mom going to be okay now? I knelt down. Yeah, buddy, she is going to be okay. You did that. He thought about it. I just told you what I heard. No, I said. You trusted me with the truth when staying quiet would have been easier. That is the bravest thing a person can do. At 7, it is extraordinary. He nodded. Then he asked about the cake. And I laughed, actually laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere deep enough to hurt and heal at the same time. The months after were slow. The investigation expanded. Victor's firm was audited. The documents were voided. Sarah filed for divorce and received full custody without contest because fighting would only deepen the criminal case. Sarah moved into a small apartment in Shepherd's Creek, 3 streets from me. 2 bedrooms, yellow curtains she picked herself, a porch just wide enough for 2 chairs, and a dog who never moved fast but was always glad to see her. Oliver started at the elementary school where Sarah had gone as a girl, the one with the red brick and the flagpole that leans slightly to the east from a storm in 2003 that nobody ever got around to fixing. He joined the after-school reading program and came home every Tuesday with a book tucked under his arm and a look on his face like he had discovered a secret the rest of the world had missed. He wanted to tell me about every one of them sitting cross-legged on my living room floor with Clementine's head on his knee, and I listened to every word because listening was the least I owed him and the most important thing I could give. Sarah started smiling again, not all at once. The way spring comes, one warm morning at a time until the cold has gone and you cannot name the exact day it left. She joined a support group. She cooked from Ellie's old index cards, handwritten recipes from a woman who believed feeding someone was love that needed no words. Sundays, she brought Oliver to my house and we ate together. Clementine would put her head on Oliver's lap and he would sneak her chicken when he thought I was not looking. I always saw it. I never said a word. Some rules are meant to be broken by children who have earned the right. Charlie came by one Saturday with coffee, and we sat on the porch watching fog lift off the hills. "You know, Thomas," he said, "I never saw a case broken open by a 7-year-old. I did not break it," I said. "Oliver did. I just knew who to call." Charlie shook his head. "You spent 23 years reading People in rooms where a wrong read cost lives. You came home and put all that away. When your grandson needed the man you used to be, you did not hesitate. That is everything." I looked at the hills and thought about Ellie. When someone shows you who they are in the small moments, believe them. Because the big moments are just the small ones with an audience. She was right. She was always right. And the biggest small moment of my life was a 7-year-old in a parking lot who showed me exactly who he was. Brave, honest, unwilling to let silence win. When I was young, I thought strength meant walking into a room and taking control. When I served, I learned strength is knowing which room to enter and when. But now, at 66, sitting on a porch where the dog has not moved in 3 hours and the hills are the color of Ellie's favorite season, I know the real truth. Strength is not what you carry. It is what you are willing to hear. It is listening when a child speaks. It is believing the whisper when the shout would be easier to ignore. It is choosing truth over the comfortable story you have been telling yourself, because the truth demands more and forgives less and will not let you go back to pretending. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think of someone who needs to be heard right now or someone who spoke the truth when nobody was ready to listen, share it with them. Sometimes the people who need these words most find them through someone who cared enough to pass them along. Subscribe so you never miss a story. And leave a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. I will be at Mabel's tomorrow morning, same booth, same coffee, same dent in the tailgate, and 3 streets away, a boy and his mother will wake up in a house with yellow curtains where nobody is afraid. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.